On this Friday night, heart-wrenching homecoming. Residents returned to Jasper weeks after the Alberta community was ravaged by wildfires.
Just taking it one day at a time, one step at a time.
Their first glimpse at the devastation and a warning to be ready to evacuate again. The mess in Montreal. A gushing geyser floods streets and homes after a major water main break. Plus, the legal troubles surrounding one of Canada's greatest equestrians. Questions over whether he faked a terminal illness. And Raygun responds.
I did take it very seriously. I worked my butt off.
The Australian breakdancer hits back at the hate after her viral, controversial Olympic performance.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with the emotional homecoming in Jasper, Alberta. Today, more than 3 weeks after a raging wildfire forced thousands from the mountain town, residents returned to find some areas burned beyond recognition. Flames devastated Jasper National Park and wiped out a third of the town's structures. And residents have been told to be ready to leave again on short notice if the fire returns. Blake Lough is just outside of Jasper tonight. So Blake, you spoke with people returning today. What did they have to say?
Jeff, one longtime resident I spoke with said it feels like the start of a very long race, one filled with ups and downs, and they're still just in the starting gate. There was a huge range of emotions as Jasperites were able to see for the first time with their own eyes what's left of their town.
There is Petro-Canada in front of our house.
On three sides of Svatslav Rudd's home are scenes of utter destruction. Friday, he could see for himself just how close it came.
Everything behind us completely burned.
Rudd fled Ukraine when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. He found a new home here until fire forced him to flee with his wife again.
We arrived in Jasper exactly since the war started and straight to the Jasper, so we already over 2 years here.
He was one of the first in line at the east gate of Jasper National Park. That's where residents were handed their re-entry guides, and anyone without a Jasper address, including media, was turned away. Ryan Davies knew his apartment building was still standing, but didn't know what he'd find inside.
Find out just what the situation is, smoke damage, food, if we're able to save anything. I have an adjuster coming in. Just taking it one day at a time, one step at a time, 1 hour at a time.
Not everyone has a home to return to. Loni Klettel has lived in Jasper her whole life. Her home was destroyed.
Obviously, I just lost everything that was historical, and all that. But I guess I just will go by and just look at this hole that will be rebuilt. That's how I'm going to look at it.
Klettel, a longtime trail builder, spent Friday in town on her bike, riding through the rain and processing the new landscape.
I really feel trails are going to be that will be our path to helping our residents and visitors kind of cope with things.
Acknowledging the heaviness of what many would be feeling, Mayor Richard Ireland wrote online saying it would be a long and difficult journey, but no one will be alone. Adding, quote, "We will rebuild side by side, stronger than ever." Jeff?
All right, Blake Lough outside of Jasper tonight. Thanks, Blake. A major cleanup is underway tonight in Montreal after a water main break near the city's Jacques Cartier Bridge. The rupture caused this massive geyser. The flooding paralyzed downtown streets for several hours today. Phil Carpenter reports.
In the end, Julien Morin and his business colleagues say they had to rent their own pump. They had no help.
There's no policemen, there's no firemen, where's all the people?
This is what he and the others saw when they arrived at their Montreal workplace Friday morning, the result of a major water main break not far from the Jacques Cartier Bridge. Their warehouse, less than 50 meters away, which houses about 30 companies, ended up with several feet of water. Some business owners on the ground floor are estimating losses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, like Morin.
It's going to be near $1 million for us on that side.
He lost everything. This canoe in Joseph Lebel's workshop in that building wasn't needed despite the volume of water. The cabinet maker says he feels lucky.
The water was flowing so quickly on Notre Dame Street, we couldn't even cross because it was gonna, like, it almost swept me away.
He estimates his losses in the tens of thousands of dollars and says he's insured. Still,
I think that's the thing that's scaring me the most. It's not the cleaning, it's dealing with the insurance.
About 3 kilometers away on Cartier Street, firefighters spent hours pumping water from streets and people's basements.
That side a couple of feet. Not in the apartment, the sub-basement. I'm lucky in a way.
Neighbors not so lucky. Some had basement apartments completely flooded. Others awoke to find their cars in several feet of water.
And all my seat and everything is just flood. It's just wet and everything.
Back at the warehouse on Notre Dame Street, merchants are focused on getting rid of water.
So tomorrow we can, assess the situation and write down what we lost really and talk to the insurance.
And hopefully reopen before too long. Phil Carpenter, Global News, Montreal.
And take a look at this. A building in downtown Toronto teetering on the verge of collapse. A nearby construction crew noticed the building shifting forward this morning and called police, prompting an evacuation of the area near Kensington Market.
At this point, there are no injuries. We have conducted a primary search on all adjoining buildings and we have evacuated all occupants. And obviously, Dundas Street West between Spadina and Denison will remain closed for the foreseeable future.
Toronto's deputy fire chief said he'd never seen anything like it. The building is home to a convenience store and a salon. Fire crews are now planning a controlled demolition of the two-story structure if the building doesn't collapse on its own. The cause is under investigation. Ontario's top court is upholding the sexual assault conviction of Canadian musician Jacob Hogarth. In 2022, the former frontman for the band Headley was found guilty of sexual assault causing bodily harm against an Ottawa woman. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but then released on bail after his lawyers appealed the decision. Today, the appeal court unanimously upheld Hogarth's conviction. He will now begin serving his 5-year sentence. Canada's Border Services Agency plans to deploy a new controversial app to help track people who've been ordered deported from Canada. The Report In app would use Amazon's facial recognition technology to confirm a person's identity and record their location data. It will be launched this fall. The CBSA says each year about 2,000 people who've been ordered deported fail to show up for authorities. This app was built to track them, but some digital privacy experts are raising concerns about a perceived lack of transparency around how the technology will be used. The United States, Qatar, and Egypt say they have presented a final proposal to Hamas and Israel for a ceasefire and a hostage deal that they hope will be finalized by the end of next week.
I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East, and we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything, but as my grandfather said, with the grace of God, good little neighbors, a lot of luck, we may have something. But we're not there yet. But it's much, much closer than it was 3 days ago.
Those comments from the U.S. president follow 2 days of negotiations in Qatar, which a senior Biden official says basically bridged every gap between Israel and Hamas. Talks will resume in Cairo next week with the hopes of sealing an agreement to end the conflict. International condemnation following an overnight Israeli settler rampage that turned deadly in the West Bank. At least one Palestinian was killed and several others seriously injured after dozens of settlers rioted in the village of Jit. Homes and cars were severely burned, while reports suggest bullets were fired at Palestinian residents. Top Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have called for those involved to be prosecuted. Ukraine says it is strengthening positions inside Russia 11 days after launching a surprise incursion. Kyiv claims it has taken control of 82 settlements in the Kursk region. And as Eric Sorensen reports, Canadian military equipment may be aiding the counteroffensive.
It has been an astonishing turn in Russia's war, a Ukrainian counteroffensive into Russia, seizing territory in the Kursk region. Ukrainian video showing what appears to be Russian soldiers surrendering. Russian footage shows civilians in the region being evacuated and taken to Moscow.
What's that?
NATO weapons such as this Canadian howitzer have been crucial in Ukraine's defense. Now there's evidence Canadian equipment is being used in Russia. A Chechen warlord posted what appears to be a captured Canadian Rochelle Senator vehicle. The Department of National Defense defends the cross-border moves, stating Ukrainians know best how to defend their homeland. Canada places no geographic restrictions on the use of military equipment that we donate to Ukraine. Canada has sent some 200 Senator multi-purpose vehicles to Ukraine. Other big pieces include 8 Leopard tanks, about 39 armored combat support vehicles. Canada's contribution covers air defense, such as air-to-air missiles, artillery, 4 howitzers as well as the tanks, ammunition, small rounds to 1,000-pound bombs, 900 Sky Ranger drones plus cameras, and field equipment, body armor, helmets, and thermal imaging. It's not clear what might be used in Russia, but Canada has contributed $4.5 billion in military assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of 2022.
Canada is one of the few nations that has not placed any restrictions on the equipment that we've donated. Our equipment may have contributed to this stunning success that we've seen over the past 7 to 10 days in Ukraine and in Russia.
In Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with his Security Council looking for what he called advanced technological solutions in Russia's military operation. NATO hardware may now be enabling Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive.
That seems to be making a big difference, and it's putting an enormous amount of pressure on Vladimir Putin to make some very, very difficult decisions, both on the ground militarily, but also in terms of PR and how he has framed this war with his own people.
Russia has reportedly diverted thousands of troops from inside Ukraine back to Russia in one of the most startling developments in the war. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A powerful typhoon is taking aim at eastern Japan tonight. Thousands of people have been ordered to leave their homes as Typhoon Ampil intensifies. It's now approaching the Tokyo area. The storm is similar in strength to a Category 4 hurricane and is dumping torrential rain, packing 200-kilometer-an-hour winds, and there are fears it could also trigger landslides. Travel is at a standstill. Hundreds of flights and trains have been canceled. The workers' strike that could send Canada's economy off the rails. Coming up, the potential job action looming over Canada's 2 biggest railways. Canada's 2 main freight railways are turning away a growing number of goods ahead of a potential work stoppage next week. CN reportedly started barring container imports from specific ports today, the latest in a string of signals that it's preparing for a network shutdown as early as Thursday. As Mackenzie Gray reports, negotiations are ongoing, but those involved say there's still a major gap to bridge to get a deal on track.
It's shaping up to be one of the biggest economic disruptions in Canadian history. Canadian Pacific and Canadian National, the country's 2 largest railways, are set to lock out their employees next Thursday if they can't reach a new labor deal.
Both companies need to be working to create a more humane rail industry and to improve rather than roll back working conditions.
The union says those rollbacks include less rest time between shifts, changes to scheduling, and safety concerns for the over 9,000 employees represented, with CN pushing for the ability to force employees to relocate.
It takes the view of workers as pieces of machinery that you can just pick up and move across Canada at a whim. And, well, at the end of the day, rail workers are human beings with lives outside of work.
Even before an official labor stoppage, we're already seeing economic impacts. Shipments requiring cooler temperatures like medicine and meat are being halted, but the most concerning, chlorine, which is used in drinking water and can only be shipped by rail.
You're looking at 10 to 14 days of supply. Some will have a bit more, but you're definitely talking days and not weeks.
The Labour Minister's office telling Global News they believe the 2 sides are far apart and have rejected CN's request for binding arbitration.
I've not been satisfied that parties share the urgency that Canadians feel around these particular disputes.
Something the NDP hopes the Liberals won't reverse on.
We've always said we would support workers and not interfere the way the Liberals and Conservatives have in the past.
I think actually.
But business groups disagree. With over $1 billion of goods moved daily, they want to see government take action to avoid a lockout.
When you look back at last year, we had 2 weeks of strikes in the ports in British Columbia. We had another week in the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is just becoming commonplace.
Both CN and CP did not respond to a request for comment about their plans to lock out workers on the same day, Jeff. Next Thursday could be the first time in modern Canadian history
when the railroad did not run.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mac. Kamala Harris is looking to cash in on an economy that appears to be rebounding. The Democratic presidential nominee is building on a plan put in motion by President Joe Biden, with proposals designed to save Americans money and offer a path to affordable home ownership. That plan comes on the heels of an economic agenda from Donald Trump that's focused more on attacking his opponent. Reggie Cicchini has the latest on the road to the White House.
In a state that's not quite in play for Democrats but has tints of purple, making it seem in reach,
hello, family and friends.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris put her finger on the economic scale, hoping to tilt it in her favor.
Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy.
Laying out a bold first 100 days plan, Harris aimed at making life more affordable, announcing a plan for millions of housing units and down payment assistance, a way to lure over younger voters who, she argues, will be worse off under Donald Trump.
We're a failing nation because of the way it's been run for the last 3.5 years.
The former president, who announced his own plans for the economy this week, leaned into protectionist trade proposals and tax cuts. But in between those proposals, he continued to dismiss concerns from his own party by targeting his opponent with personal attacks.
She's not smart. I don't believe she loves our country.
I think we're going to see much more of that Donald Trump in the coming weeks and months, and much less of the disciplined, on-message, concise Donald Trump that a lot of Republicans are hoping for.
The momentum behind the Harris campaign has slowly chipped away at Trump's lead, nationally and in battleground states. But it also appears to be eroding his grip on people's views of the economy. 42% now preferring Harris's views to 41% for Trump.
If I were the Republicans, I would be hanging Biden policies, the economy and immigration around Vice President Harris at every opportunity.
Whether Harris's economic message to voters resonates is still unknown, but it will be front and center at the party's convention in Chicago next week, alongside a string of other high-stakes matters, including the situation in the Middle East, which Harris will have to confront, with massive protests planned for Monday. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Still ahead, equestrian controversy. The Canadian rider facing questions over whether he faked a terminal illness. Well, talk about a close encounter. A group of friends who were out on a fishing trip yesterday off the west coast of Vancouver Island captured this video. They say this pod of orcas, with their dazzling dorsal fins, suddenly started swimming towards their boat. Even the charter's longtime skipper said he'd never seen anything like it. One of Canada's top Olympic equestrians is facing more legal trouble. A court ruling is raising questions about whether Eric Lamaze lied about having brain cancer while being sued for millions of dollars. Lamaze's legendary show jumping career began back in the 1990s. He won more Olympic medals than any other Canadian rider. Our Nathaniel Dove reports on the allegations and the questions over his rise to the top of Canada's equestrian community.
Eric Lamaze, Canada.
When you see somebody doing so well in the show ring, you believe what they say.
Show jumper Karina Frederick's family has had a long history with Eric Lamaze, eventually making a massive investment to buy horses from the man who became a celebrated Olympian.
It took 10 years for us to figure out that Peppercorn actually had a surgery done in Europe on one of her legs where they cut the nerves in her leg.
Her family's stable sued Lamaze, alleging he misrepresented 2 horses, including one that was lame. Lamaze denied wrongdoing and sought to adjourn, arguing his treatment for terminal cancer prevented him attending court. He faced many other civil lawsuits.
And Lamaze had already been sued in Ontario. He was also sued in Texas, and he faced more than a dozen lawsuits in Florida. Now, some were settled, others dismissed on jurisdictional grounds or because court staff couldn't find him. And when he did respond, he denied wrongdoing. But by February 2022, judges ruled against him for fraud, contract breaches, and for unpaid taxes and fees. And Lamaze have been ordered to pay more than $2 million. February 2022 is also when Equestrian Canada, the sport's governing body, named Lamaze to a leadership position.
Some cases were also dismissed voluntarily, with prejudice or through case management. He became technical advisor and led the national team to several top 10 international finishes. A year later, they announced he wasn't returning, citing his brain cancer. Emails submitted to court from 2019 show his then lawyer argued Lamaze couldn't appear because he is fighting for his life against an aggressive brain tumor. But footage appears to show Lamaze competing then. His lawyer then submitted letters from a cancer clinic in Belgium as proof he was sick. Fredericks hired a private investigator.
The investigator indeed went to the hospital where these physicians who supposedly prepared these reports confirmed they were frauds.
In a ruling, the judge wrote, "I cannot find any of the evidence that Mr. Lamaze relies upon to be either credible or reliable." Lamaze's lawyer withdrew, saying, "I had unknowingly made representations to the court based on representations made to me by Mr. Lamaze, which I believed to be truthful, but apparently were not."
When this news came out, there was a second wave of grief, of people grieving for the death of the idea of the man they thought they'd known.
Equestrian Canada says it does not research an athlete's or staff member's personal life, non-sport related business dealings, or horse sales. Global News contacted Lamaze. He said some of the lawsuits mentioned are inaccurate, though he did not explain and had no further comment. Lamaze told the Toronto Star he had cancer and the letters were submitted by mistake. On August 8th, 15 years after the lawsuit began, a judge awarded Fredericks a default judgment in her favor. Lamaze did not put forward a defense.
It's important that people know the truth and don't be blinded by accolades and the allure that comes with that.
Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, an Australian breakdancer breaks her silence after her widely mocked Olympic debut. Welcome back to an update now on a story that sent the sports world into a backspin. That Australian Olympic breakdancer who performed a controversial routine at the Paris Games is speaking out. Rachel Gunn responded to the backlash and media scrutiny head on. Neethu Garcha reports.
When Rachel Gunn, the Australian breakdancer known as Raygun, practiced for her and the sport's Olympic debut, she didn't expect the wave of backlash she's now addressing head on.
I didn't realize that that would also open the door to so much hate, which has frankly been pretty devastating.
The 36-year-old college professor with a PhD in cultural studies faced intense scrutiny after losing all 3 of her round-robin battles.
Where's that music coming from?
Gunn's unique dance moves became the focus of memes and jokes.
Wow, Raygun!
While I went out there and I had fun, I did take it very seriously. I worked my butt off preparing for the Olympics and I gave my all.
The Australian Olympic Committee condemned a since-removed petition based on unsubstantiated claims of improper selection, labeling it as misleading and harmful, and many are rallying around Raygun.
For us, she basically represented breaking and hip-hop. She was trying to be original and bring something new to the table. So from our perspective, there was nothing really shocking.
I feel sorry for the athlete, and that should not happen in our world.
Breaking will not be featured in the 2028 Los Angeles Games, a decision made last year. Though the sport's time in the spotlight might be over, Raygun is still clarifying some misconceptions about the judging process.
She actually received 0 points for that.
There are actually no points in breaking. If you want to see how the judges thought I compared to my opponents, you can actually see the comparison percentages across the 5 criteria on Olympics.com.
She's calling for privacy as she steps back to recharge, serving as an example of how in the world of Olympic sports, true championship is about more than medals. It's about standing strong in the face of adversity. Neethu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the Heritage Carousel in North Bay, Ontario. Thanks for watching.